she have a lot of Amish?
Well, she was Amish.
Oh, she was.
Both she and Gideon were raised Amish. So a lot of their families, a lot of like cousins and uncles and nephews, are Amish. And everybody knows everybody. So again, she was 90 years old. We had a viewing on Friday night that went from like 5:30 to 8:30.
Okay.
It was nonstop all the time. For a 90-year-old, I don't think you can see that. So it was just a lot of
Let's pray real quick and we'll get started, okay? Dear Lord, we praise you that you are the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. We lean on you in all aspects of life, Lord. You are our rock and our salvation. And without you, we would be lost physically and spiritually. We thank you for your salvation, and we just pray tonight as we look at this Song of Moses that we would be reminded of the truths in your word that are eternal. And I just pray for myself that whatever I speak would be true and from your word. Pray these things in your Son's name. Amen. Okay, well, part of the reason I had to sing that song, Rock of Ages, is because God as our rock is one of the themes of what we're going to be talking about tonight, and that is Deuteronomy chapter 32. If you can turn there, and I'm going to read it for us. It's a long chapter, so I'm going to channel my inner Dave Howard and go quickly. And I'll start in verse 30 of chapter 1. Then Moses spoke in hearing of all the assembly of Israel the words of this song until they were complete. Give ear, O heavens, and let me speak, and let the earth hear the words of my mouth. Let my teaching drop as the rain, my speech distill as the dew, as the droplets on the fresh grass, and as the showers on the herb. For I proclaim the name of the Lord, ascribe the greatness to our God. The rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are just, a God of faithfulness and without injustice. Righteous and upright is he. They have acted corruptly toward him. They are not his children because of their defect, but are perverse and crooked generation. Do you thus repay the Lord, O foolish and unwise people? Is not your Father who has bought you? He has made you and established you. Remember the days of old. Consider the years of all generations. Ask your father, and he will inform you, your elders, and they will tell you. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of man, he set the boundaries of the peoples, according to the number of the sons of Israel. For the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob is the allotment of his inheritance. He found him in a desert land, and in the howling waste of a wilderness. He encircled him, he cared for him. He guarded him as the pupil of his eye. Like an eagle that stirs up its nest, that hovers over its young, he spread his wings and caught them. He carried them on his pinions. The Lord alone guided him, and there were no foreign gods with him. He made him ride on the high places of the earth, and he ate the produce of the field. And he made him suck honey from the rock and oil from the flinty rock. Curds of cows and milk of the flock with fat of lambs and rams, the breed of Bashan and goats, with the finest of the wheat and the blood of grapes you drank wine. But Jeshurun grew fat and kicked. You were grown fat, thick, and sleek. Then he forsook God who made him and scorned the rock of his salvation. They made him jealous with strange gods. With abominations they provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons who were not God, to gods whom they have not known, new gods who came lately, whom your fathers did not dread. You neglected the rock who begot you, and forgot the God who gave you birth. The Lord saw this and spurned them because of the provocation of his sons and daughters. Then he said, I will hide my face from them. I will see what their end shall be. For they are a perverse generation, sons in whom there is no faithfulness. They have made me jealous with what is not God. They have provoked me to anger with their idols. So I will make them jealous with those who are not a people. I will provoke them to anger with a foolish nation. For a fire is kindled in my anger, and burns to the lowest part of Sheol, and consumes the earth with its yield, and sets fire on the foundations of the mountains. I will heap misfortunes on them. I will use my arrows on them. They will be wasted by famine and consumed by plague and bitter destruction, and the teeth of beasts I will send upon them, with the venom of crawling things of the dust. Outside the sword will bereave, and inside terror, both young man and virgin. The nursing with the man of gray. I would have said, I will cut them to pieces. I will remove the memory of them from men. Had I not feared the provocation by the enemy, that their adversaries would misjudge, that they would say, our hand is triumphant, and the Lord has not done all this. For they are a nation lacking in counsel, and there is no understanding in them. Would that they were wise, they would understand this, that they would discern their future. How could one chase 1,000 and two put 10,000 to flight unless their rock had sold them, and the Lord given them up? Indeed, their rock is not like our rock. Even our enemies judge this. For their vine is the vine of Sodom, and from the fields of Gomorrah their grapes are grapes of poison, their clusters bitter. Their wine is the venom of serpents and the deadly poison of cobras. Is it not laid up in store with me, sealed up in my treasuries? Vengeance is mine and retribution. In due time their foot will slip, for the day of their calamity is near, and the impending things are hastening upon them. For the Lord will vindicate his people, and will have compassion on his servants. When he sees their strength is gone, and there is none remaining, bond or free. And he will say, where are their gods, the rock in which they sought refuge? Who ate the fat of their sacrifice and drank the wine of their drink offering? Let them rise up and help you. Let them be your hiding place. See now that I am he, and there is no God beside me. It is I who put to death and give life. I have wounded, and it is I who heal, and there is no one who can deliver them from my hand. Indeed, I lift up my hand to heaven, and I say, as I live forever, if I sharpen my flashing sword and my hand takes hold on justice, I will render vengeance on my adversaries, and I will repay those who hate me. And I will make my arrows drunk with blood, and my sword will devour flesh with the blood of the slain and the captives, and from the long-haired leaders of the enemy. Rejoice, O nations, his people, for he will avenge the blood of his servants, and will render vengeance on his adversaries, and will atone for his land and his people. Okay, well, typically when we think of a song, we think of, in Sunday school, you learn a little ditty to kind of remember things. I personally remember Father Abraham had many sons had dread. That's not quite as happy of a song, is it? Lots of death and destruction. And if I was to title this anything, I wouldn't. It is a song of Moses, and it is meant to be sung. He spoke it in front of the whole nation of Israel, but I would call it a song of witness, and that's kind of the title of tonight's lesson, a song of witness. My goal is not to go through each and every verse. It's a long song, but I want to give you guys the structure of it as best I can and the limited time that we have, and then give you some devotional thoughts as we're going along to kind of hang your head on and think through. So, to kind of set the context, the background of this song. This is one of Moses' last times speaking to the nation of Israel in just a couple chapters, and it's really within the same time frame, same week, month, Moses dies, and so this is his finale, if you will. If we're going to talk about a song, this is his swan song. It's the only other last time that's recorded that he speaks to the rest of a group of Israelites is the blessings he gives in chapter 33. And it's also him passing on leadership from himself to Joshua. So Joshua is actually here by his side while he's giving this song. And at this point, Moses has led the people of Israel for 40 years. And most of that has been through the desert, kicking and screaming. So in one of his last addresses to the people of Israel, what do you think he wants to say to this people who have given him nothing but rebellion and whining and complaining for the last 40 years? Well, the thing is, we don't get Moses' last words. We get Moses' impression of the people of Israel, but specifically God's last words through Moses to the people of Israel. This song is not, it's not prophecy, and it's not wisdom literature. The intention of it is to show the people where they should go. So if you actually look over or how they should live. If you look over in Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse, give me a second here. Verse 19. Now, therefore, write this song for yourselves and teach it to the sons of Israel. Put it on their lips so that this song may be a witness for me against the sons of Israel. Yeah. And it's not just a finale for Moses. It's kind of a finale for the book of Deuteronomy. And the book of Deuteronomy is kind of like the book of Leviticus in that it gives a lot of laws and commandments for the people of Israel to do. But the emphasis in the book of Deuteronomy is actually on the heart. The word heart appears more in the book of Deuteronomy than any other book of the Bible. And so God is concerned with Israel's heart. And this is why he writes this song. It's for them as a witness. And really more than that, it's not just a song, it's actually in the form of a lawsuit. So this lawsuit, the Israelites would have recognized it. So the structure is kind of like a lord suing their vassal for breaking the contract, the deeds of their contract. And so what is most of the rest of Deuteronomy and Exodus and Leviticus been? It's been the establishment of the covenant. And as we're getting to the end of the book of Deuteronomy, Moses has already kind of outlined in chapter 28, mostly in 28, the consequences of breaking that contract. And this song isn't going into those details. You already have those details in the previous part of the book. This song is so the Israelites remember kind of the tenor and form of what God has said. Okay, and we're going to have about 5 or 6 points here, and I don't mean for you to write down everything, but just like kind of the main points as we're going along. Okay, so first main point of this lawsuit, this song of witness, the opening statements, verses 1 through 6, the opening statements. Okay, so Moses comes up and he's about to speak to the nation of Israel, and he says, "Give ear, O heavens, and let me speak. Let the earth hear the words of my mouth." And so Moses, what he does, he's acting as God's prosecutor. He's going before the people and he's saying, "Heavens and earth, be my witness. I call you to hear what God has to say towards the people of Israel, his accusation." And yet there's still hope. Right? So if you look in verse 2, it says, "Let my teaching drop as the rain, my speech distill as the dew, as the droplets on the fresh grass, and as the showers on the herb." And so this song, even though it's an accusation, even though it's in the form of a lawsuit, is meant to be refreshing to those who remember it and its teachings. It's not just meant for doom and despair. Okay? So, verses 1 through 3 is the declaration and calling of the witnesses. And the very purpose of the song, other than to be a witness, is actually found in verse 3. It's the character of God. So Moses says, "For I proclaim the name of the Lord, ascribe greatness to our God." So even before he goes into all the details of this lawsuit, he says, here's God. Here's God's greatness. Okay? And then the summary of the accusation, verses 4 through 6. So this is all under main point, the opening statements. Summary of the accusation. And it's God's faithfulness versus Israel's unfaithfulness. He says in verse 4, "The rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are just, a God of faithfulness and without injustice." And verse 5, "They have acted corruptly toward him. They are not his children because of their defect, but are a perverse and crooked generation." Yeah. So, main point number 2, okay? The facts of the trial. The facts of the trial. This is verses 7 through 18. 7 through 18. Oh, actually, in verse 6, he directly states the accusation. He says, "Do you thus repay the Lord, O foolish and unwise people? Is he not your father who has bought you? He has made you and established you." Okay, and then he kind of expands on those two thoughts, God's faithfulness and Israel's unfaithfulness in the facts of the trial. So he's done his opening statements. He said, here's the basis, and then expands on that. So in the faithfulness of God, in verses 7 through 14, we see the protection and provision that the Most High has given to this nation of Israel. So in verse 7, he says, "Okay, remember what I did for you. You were personally my inheritance. I own you. Jacob is my allotment. I am truly your Lord," essentially, is what he's saying there in verses 7 through 9. And in verse 10, he brings up this vivid picture, which they're not going to forget, because they just finished walking through the desert for 40 years. It's the picture of a man dying in the desert in need of water. He is found in the desert in the howling waste of a wilderness, and God encircles him and takes care of him. And you can imagine the Israelites now thinking, oh, God provided the manna in the wilderness. God provided the water from the rock. And even as you mentioned the rock throughout this entire song, I'm sure that's what they're thinking. They're like, oh, we got water from a rock. I remember Moses, he did that. He struck a rock. And so they should have been reminded throughout, okay, this is God's provision towards me. This is what God has done. And this is kind of how this lawsuit structure kind of goes. It says, here's what the mighty benevolent Lord has done, and then it's direct contrast to the vassal. The unfaithfulness of God's people is shown in verses 15 through 18. Okay? So, and this is, after we see in verses 12 through 14, even more of God's provision. Like, it wasn't just that they got water from a rock, it's that they're about to head into the promised land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and they can see it. Moses can see it, even though he's not going to go into the land. And then verse 15, but Jeshurun grew fat and kicked. There's a little bit of wordplay here, because Jeshurun means upright one, and the contrast is he's not upright. He is wicked. And he forsook God and scorned the flock of his salvation. So, main point number 3, the verdict of the trial, verses 19 through 26. Verses 19 through 26. We see that Israel has been unfaithful, even though God has been faithful to them. And then God declares the verdict in verses 19 through 22. The Lord saw this, that they were provided for, and yet they went to a God that they did not know. They sacrificed to demons in verses 17, to new gods who came lately. So they weren't even there when they first entered the promised land. It was totally new, like a new Baal just showed up. It wasn't like they've been there before. Nope, completely brand new. And God's like, you don't remember my provision towards you, and yet you go towards these new gods? And that's how it is sometimes in our world. Actually, a lot of the time in our world. The things that we worship are often rotating. We're going through a cycle because they're new. Satan uses novelty to grab our affections and our worships. And that's something that you should consider. Are there new things in your life that are grabbing your affection more than God? Is it a activity, hobby, person, thing? Israel was enamored with the new gods of the promised land. And yet God is not fooled. And when he declares his verdict in verse 19 through 22, he's angry. He's angry. He says, I will hide my face from them. I will see what their end shall be. For they are a perverse generation, sons in whom there is no faithfulness. They have made me jealous for what is not God. They have provoked me to anger with their idols. God is angry and sad that the people have turned away from him. And that's how it is with us too when we turn away from God. God is both angry and sad. We grieve the Spirit when we sin against him and all the provision that he's given us, all the blessings in the heavenly places. Okay. So we're still under main point number 3, the verdict of the trial. And the next kind of subhead is the execution of the verdict, verses 23 through 27. So God says, okay, I'm going to punish you, and this is what it's going to look like in the execution of the verdict. I will heap misfortune upon them. I will use my arrows on them. They will be wasted by famine and consumed by plague and bitter destruction. The teeth of beasts I will send upon them with the venom of crawling things of the dust. And really, that's calling back to all the things that he mentioned earlier on in the book, where he specifically laid out, okay, this is what's going to happen, then this is what's going to happen, then this is what's going to happen. And Moses doesn't dive into detail here because he's like, hey, summary. You should already know this, but this is to help you remember. Yet there's one thing, look real quick in verse 27. Verse 27, actually I'm going to start in verse 26. He says, I would have said, you can phrase that a little differently. It should be phrased something along the lines of, then I would have said, I will cut them to pieces. I will remove the memory of them from men. Had I not, in verse 27, feared the provocation by the enemy, that their adversaries would misjudge, that they would say, our hand is triumphant and the Lord has not done all this. God says, okay, wait a second, I'm going to spare my judgment. And what is the one thing that spares God's judgment? What do you guys think? Jesus' death on the cross, yes. But for what purpose is Jesus' death on the cross? Take our place? Yep. It's for God's glory. That's the only reason that God shows mercy, prevents wrath, That's the reason he does anything. And so here he says, Israel, I would have utterly destroyed you. Complete annihilation. You have spit in my face. But I don't want people to see that. I don't want people to think that they did it. They caused your destruction. No, that's me. That's mine. That's my justice. No one will take my honor from me. And that's the same today for you and I. We are saved because God wants to be glorified, not because we are worthy of any salvation, not because he pitied us more than any, even though he did. No, it's for his glory. Yeah. So, we're still like Israel in many other ways. Main point number 4, Israel's ignoring of the warning signs. This is verses 28 through 33. And if, as you're looking through, in verse 27, Moses, he's speaking for God directly, kind of in the first person. You would have thought, okay, he's talking about the adversaries there. A little switch here in verse 28. He's talking about the nation of Israel now. So verse 27, he's speaking about the adversaries. Verse 28, he's speaking about the nation of Israel. And he says, if they were wise, they would see the signs. For they are a nation lacking in counsel, and there's no understanding in them. Yeah, God has given them, he's progressively given them throughout the book of Deuteronomy kind of signs like, oh, you disobeyed, famine's going to come. Oh, you disobeyed, this is going to happen. Oh, you disobeyed, this is going to happen. To the point where they get to the place where they've completely disobeyed and annihilation comes, exile comes. And that's kind of the progression here. And God says, they don't get it. They don't see it. What are you doing? And again, we're like Israel like that sometimes. In our lives, God operates like this on a micro level. We continue in sin, and God generously, graciously brings discipline so that he might restore fellowship with us, and we still ignore it. And that discipline in a believer's life gets progressively worse and worse and worse, seeking restoration until death sometimes. Yeah. Okay, 5th main point, and I'm wrapping up here soon, I promise. 5th main point is the possibility of restoration and justice, verses 34 through 43. So, God says, even though this people, they've ignored my warning signs, I want to judge them, but I will judge the enemies of them. God remembers in verse 34, is it not laid up in my storehouse with me, sealed up in my treasuries? He remembers all the wicked things that the nations he uses to judge Israel. He remembers all their wicked deeds. And the next verse, kind of a quotation that everyone would be familiar with, vengeance is mine and retribution. And we get that same quotation in Romans chapter 12. And so God remembers Israel's enemies and what they have done, and he will judge them for it. And really, if we're thinking about today, God does that with our enemies too. He does that with all of the wicked, all of those who are unsaved. He will bring justice. Vengeance is the Lord's. And the believer can find comfort in that. Such comfort. And you can think Israel, they must, if those who truly refresh this song in their mind, they might have been thinking that as well. Okay. And then, because I'm a little over time, we're going to kind of skip towards the end here. And in verses 39 through 42, God swears, okay, I'm going to destroy the enemies. It's a very vivid picture. And you can find a parallel of that picture in Isaiah 63, verses 1 through 6. It's literally God stomping on the enemies like grapes in a winepress. His garments stained by that. But then in verse 43, it's the restoration of Israel. It says, "Rejoice, O nations, his people, for he will avenge the blood of his servants and will render vengeance on his adversaries and will atone for his land and his people." And this is calling to the time when Israel will be restored. And I believe this is actually pointing to the time after the white throne judgment when all nations will rejoice with Israel's restoration. And so in conclusion, this song is a song of witness to Israel's people. But for us, it's a song of witness in that it shows that the way God operates, even though we're outside of the old covenant and we're in the new covenant, specifically towards his people, it's very similar to how he operates today. There are no surprises with God. Well, there are, but he is immutable. He doesn't change. God is great. He has been faithful, and we are unfaithful. He's given us plenty of blessings, and we are tempted to grow fat on them. He desires our heart devoted to him. He is sad and angry when we disobey, and his divine anger is directed elsewhere towards Christ. He still gets angry. The only reason he saves us is for his glory. He will bring justice and vengeance on all the wrongdoers in the world, and he will restore Israel, and we will be restored from this fallen world. Okay, I'm going to pray, and then we're going to pray. Dear Lord, thank you for this time in your word. I just pray that we would remember that you are an unchanging God, and you would draw our hearts towards you and towards your glory and your loving care of us, whether that be in discipline or provision. Lord, I just pray tonight that we would come before you with humbleness and graciousness and a heart that desires to worship you as you are.